Following my Gojo analysis video that I made a couple of weeks ago, this video serves as basically the second part of the analysis, but with more focus on the possible theory mentioned in the former, about Gojo becoming a villain in the future of the story. Just like the first video, this one will be focused on the story as a whole, including the manga, so spoiler alert for those that don't wish to be spoiled. The world of Jujutsu Kaisen is one full of people fixated on breaking through the chains, bonds and miseries that the world has placed upon them. Whether you look at the tragic position that the young Itadori found himself in early on in the story, and his pursuit to live a proper life and making the most out of it, the fate of Junpei and Riko, the same goal but different approaches of Brain and Yuki to rid the world of the curse of curses, or even Geto's attempt at separating the people and creating a world where only sorcerers exist. Some of these characters are overcome with an ambition that seems to supersede what is possible, and all of them are humans that seek the best of this world, or at least for themselves. While there is multiple people that don't seem to be aiming to do anything impossible or change anything, there is also those that can't help but change because of what's going on around them. In order to save lives, you have to value them, and Gojo Satoru to some extent doesn't, as he once said that it's a pain looking out for the weak. In Jujutsu Kaisen, the sorcerers are meant to be saviors. They are supposed to protect those that can't protect themselves from the supernatural threat that is curses. But with so much injustice, hypocrisy, and cunning in its society, the humans in Jujutsu Kaisen can be more dangerous and cruel than the curses themselves. Gojo, the man at the summit of power in such world, a man who went through his fair amount of hardships and struggles, suffers from not just insecurities and clearly has what some might call a god complex, but is hated and plotted against by those on top due to personal problems and hierarchy issues. It only makes sense that he will fight back. So far in the story, we saw him not once, but 3 times threatening and showing how he can easily direct his wrath towards them. In the prequel, when they were aiming to execute Yuta, after Yuji's death, which was caused by them, and when he and his best friend took the decision to face them if Riko was to refuse becoming the vessel. Now that Gojo is sealed away for some time, they made some moves that were impossible when he was still around. Ordering the execution of Yuji after Sukuna's actions, shamelessly blaming Gojo and Yaga for the events of Shibuya, connecting them to Geto and framing them as culprits, ordering the execution of Principal Yaga and threatening everyone that dares to remove the seal and freeing Gojo. It's basically them saying, this is an opportunity we will make the most use out of in solidifying our control and power. But the man who was holding himself back because of way less important reasons will definitely come back at them. There is no doubt that Gojo will come after the higher-ups once he is released, and something we all can definitely be sure of is that Japan won't be stabilized at the time, that even possibly the chaos that's all over the place right now won't even match up to what the world will look like in the near future by the time Gojo gets out. In a normal world where Gojo already shows signs of pleasure improving his power and enjoying belittling and disrespecting others, everyone to him is below him. Compare these 2 panels of Gojo and Sukuna from their fights against Jugo. Sukuna played around with him because he was much superior and was dominating, but at least before killing him he praised him, telling him that he is strong and should be proud of that. Sukuna did what he usually does, but at least in Jogo's final moments, he made him proud, and he met the world for Jugo. On the other hand, Gojo just casually tells him he's weak, using their fight as a lesson for Itadori and mocking him throughout it. He cares only about proving that he is the strongest in a level way beyond anyone else. His overconfidence makes him believe he can even defeat Sukuna with ease. He even called himself the only one honored throughout heaven and earth, unlike Sukuna who is described like that. Gojo's mental issues I went over in the first video are clear and present. His sanity is questionable every time he fights. He shows off a creepy lust for murder and proving his superiority. But the question remains, does he value the human lives that he is supposed to protect? The discussion between him and Gojo, where he broaches the subject of Amanai's merger being called off if she herself isn't willing to go along with it. This was before even meeting Amanai. Later, the moment on the beach, where he picks up on Amanai's reluctance to go back and persuades Gojo to postpone their return. These are indications that, in contrast to his blaze and flippant attitude on the surface, he is in fact capable of empathy and compassion deep down in certain emotions. In his encounter with Toji, he says he is not angry or vengeful on behalf of Amanai, but there is something to be said about that, how he is self-aware enough to acknowledge this inability in the first place. The meaningless death of an innocent girl, followed by his fallout with Gojo, led him to the realization that it's apparently not enough to be strong. He can only save those that are prepared to be saved. This is a stark contrast to the "throughout heaven and earth I alone am the honored one" line, which was spoken in a moment of euphoria when he had unlocked a new technique and was drunk on power. Following those experiences and losses in his past, he resolves to transform Jujutsu World from inside out, armed with the aforementioned realization that his strength alone isn't enough. He sets out to raise allies of the next generation, while carrying his conviction that kids should be allowed to freely live their youth. He goes out of his way for Yuta and Yuji, and pulls strings to postpone their executions, giving them both a chance and enough time to live a proper life and enjoy their lives the best they can. Those actions speak louder than any grief or tears he might have shed over Amanai's death. So he isn't exactly not sad over her death, or as some may interpret that, he didn't feel emotions because of his lack of expression. He does value life, but whose life does he value? Is it the same ideology that Gojo had, that non-sorcerers are not worthy of living? Or is it something else that the author still hasn't highlighted yet? Speaking of the "throughout heaven and earth I alone am the honored one," I would like to bring your attention to something called tarot cards, which are a set of cards used in tarot games and fortune telling. We've seen them once in anime before through Gojo. As we all know, Jujutsu Kaisen draws a lot of symbolism from Buddhism and spirituality. There is this specific card that I found to be interesting and maybe related to Gojo. It's the Magician card. The Magician card is a man with an infinity halo above his head, something that we saw in the cover of chapter 89, featuring Gojo with the same infinity halo above his head. Without getting in depth, the card symbolizes power, skill, and creation. It means infinite potential of creation and going higher, something that we can clearly see in Gojo's power and type of personality. Many scenes show him standing on top, from the scene in the first opening, the moment he entered the battle in the exchange arc, and in Shibuya when he was analyzing the situation. But here is where it becomes more interesting. There is something called the reverse magician, which represents greed, narcissism, lack of mental clarity, and cunningness. It is the opposite of the magician, both in effect and looks. If we take a look at Gojo's fight with Toji, we can clearly notice how the panels sometimes change from having Gojo straight to having him reversed upside down. That fight was a critical moment in Gojo's life. He was never the same after that, not physically nor mentally. I would like to look at it as if Gojo was on the brink of change, but he remained stable and solidified his position on top. But sooner or later, he will switch to the reverse magician, to the reverse Gojo, going from someone that a lot of people look up to and is very important, to an outcast and possibly someone completely misunderstood. Gojo going against the higher-ups doesn't necessarily make him a villain in the story, because they themselves are villains to some extent. but it's more about the approaches. If Gojo transforms into a maniac and loses every intention to saving lives and understanding, their values will put him against Yuji, and that might become the conflict between the two. I would also like to mention the time he brought back a fight between a Limitless user and a Ten Shadows user when he was talking to Megami, and hinting at how he can reach his level and defeat him, which can be considered foreshadowing to a possible fight between the two in the future. Imagine how terrifying will Gojo be as an antagonist, seeing his vicious and scary actions but directed towards Yuji, Yuta, and Megami and the rest of his students. Jujutsu Kaisen has always been a mess. It never really was about just sorcerers against curses, and it definitely is getting even more complicated because of how many sides we have now. The brain's shady objective, Yuki's goal, the curse's desire, the higher-ups, the drama between the clans, Sukuna's mysterious plan, and possibly the addition of Gojo as a villain and opposing the heroes of the story that I personally believe will also create their own group, orchestrated by Yuta and Yuji. There is only more to see and discover about the future of this story. That was all I have for this theory, other than a few things here and there. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more Jujutsu Kaisen and other anime content. And thanks for watching.